Good morning, everyone, again. It's so great to have you all with us today, and I'm really excited to be introducing our speaker today. So, a little bit of housekeeping ahead of time. One, thank you again all for joining us today. We have people joining us all the way from the Philippines to Pennsylvania and Ithaca. I saw someone from Ithaca, New York. So we've got a lot of people joining us, and I'm joining from the West Coast as well. So whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening for you, thank you so much for joining us today, especially because I am very excited to introduce our speaker, who is PhD candidate Katie Fitzgerald. And she's joining us from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And Katie works with Dr. Joy O'Keefe on forest management and bats and has been working in this field and for her PhD work for, I guess, what is it, 4, 5, 6 years now? Like it's been a
Right.
while that you've
Yeah.
been a part of the project. And she's an absolutely brilliant person, and I'm really excited to have her joining us today to be talking on a really interesting, broad subject that probably affects so many bat researchers in different ways. So, without further ado, and Katie's going to go through and introduce herself as well, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off and let Katie go ahead and tell us all about forest management and bats. So, Katie, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Dana, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. So today I'm going to give you a big picture look at forest management. We definitely won't cover everything, but we'll hit on some major topics such as who manages forests, how they do it, and why. And of course, we'll tie it all back to what this means for bats. But before we dive into forest management, I want to tell you a little bit about how I ended up here talking to you all about bats and management. Maybe. Hold on. All right. So I grew up in sunny San Diego, California, and I did my undergraduate degree at San Francisco State University, where I majored in natural resource management. That's also where I discovered bat research, and I very quickly became completely obsessed with bats. Like there was no turning back for me. Which led me to work to different like field positions after graduating. So most of them were with bats. And then I had one really amazing opportunity working with California condors. That's actually the bird that I'm holding in this photo. And then I joined an NSF-funded research project that took me to Borneo, where I helped complete the final year of a 3-year project in a man and biosphere reserve. We were studying how bats use different zones within the reserve. So the zones were ranged from heavily protected to more influenced by humans. And that's where really the first time I started thinking critically about how bats use their landscape and how human activity shapes those patterns. So after that, I earned my master's degree at Angelo State University under Dr. Lauren Ammerman, who is truly an absolute gem. And there I studied the seasonal diet of Myotis velifer, which meant a lot of time thinking about what bats are eating. And now I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois. I'm co-advised by Dr. Joy Keefe and Dr. Corey Seski, who are also absolute gems. And my current research focuses on bat stress physiology across landscapes. And part of my research specifically looks at how bats respond to forest management in northeastern Missouri. So some of my references today will, like on the plant and animal communities, will be from that region. And just for fun, this July will mark 9 years of me working with bats. And I collect houseplants and vintage clothing, and my favorite plant genus is Calathea. They're beautiful, they're dramatic, and a little high maintenance. So that's a little bit about how I ended up here. And that brings us to the big question for today, which is what is forest management? I don't know what this red line is, so I'm sorry. I must have drawn something on there, but so to start with what forest management is, I'm gonna look at this more simply at first. And so We're going to look at it not just only how it influences bats, but wildlife more broadly. So at its core, forest management is the science and practice of overseeing planning and manipulating forest ecosystems. And this could be accomplished in different ways, such as removing invasive species, thinning trees, or shaping the composition and structure of forest habitats. And because a lot of wildlife depend on vegetation, either directly or indirectly, any change to vegetation is likely going to affect wildlife in some capacity. But change isn't inherently negative. Forest management can create short-term disruption, but with long-term benefit. So for example, removing invasive species like multiflora rose or honeysuckle might temporarily reduce cover or food for some animals. Oops, sorry. But in the long run, removing that invasive species means that you're going to promote the native vegetation that's happening there, and which will promote more biodiversity throughout the landscape. So management involves a lot of different groups, professional foresters, government agencies, tribal nations, private landowners, logging professionals. And there's an interesting fact that more than half of forest land in the US is privately owned. So that means that private landowners have a huge influence on what forests look like. And so these groups develop and carry out management strategies like thinning, harvesting, or replanting, all guided by something really important, which is a plan. So a forest management plan is basically a long-term roadmap. It outlines what the goals are and how the forest will be used, maintained, and improved over time. And because without a plan, it's just random tree cutting. So part of a management plan is establishing goals, and management goals can look very different depending on who owns the land. So some goals are economic, some focus on forest health or restoration, others prioritize wildlife conservation, recreation, soil or water protection, or reducing risk to wildfire. So because not all forests are managed for the same thing, outcomes can vary a lot. And private landowners ultimately decide their goals. On public land, management is usually guided by policies and long-term objectives. So when we're thinking about forest management with wildlife as part of the goal, we really have to think about habitat components. And at the most basic level, animals need food, cover, reproductive sites, safe resting or roosting areas, and those needs change seasonally and across life stages. So different species need different things. Same management action might not benefit one species while disadvantage another one. Some animals may just pass through a forest briefly while others depend on it long term. But even short-term habitat changes can still influence survival and fitness. So now I just want to concentrate on food and cover. So food is a huge piece of forest management. Different practices influence what food resources are available and in what quantity. So managers might promote mass-producing trees like oaks for hard mast, or encourage soft mast species that need more light to produce fruit. So light availability really matters here. So soft mass species often need more open canopy. Hard mass species like oaks can still persist with lower light. So management can also increase understory diversity. So instead of maintaining like a single species stand, increasing that diversity could lead to more insect communities, which would benefit insectivorous bats and other animals. And when you build structural and plant diversity, you build stronger food webs. So energy is able to move through efficiently through the ecosystem. So now let's talk about cover. So cover is basically anything that helps animals conserve energy and stay safe. It's protection from predators, protection from weather, heat stress, and competition. And vegetation is one of the biggest forms of cover. And forests provide a lot of structural elements, so snags for like dead trees, down logs, the leaf litter, and each of these features support different species. Like snags, great for cavity nesting birds and bats. Down logs and leaf litter, perfect for small mammals, amphibians, and invertebrates. And sometimes in forests, we have rocky outcrops, which could also benefit bats and reptiles for thermal regulation and protection. And for bats specifically, cover is huge. Bats actually spend more time roosting than doing anything else. Roosts protect them from predators, buffer them from weather, help regulate body temperature, are essential for reproduction. In forests, bats commonly use snags, tree cavities, exfoliating bark, and sometimes foliage. Different species specialize in different structures, and globally, it gets even cooler. So some bats use bamboo. One of my favorite examples, the Hardwick's woolly bat, which roosts inside of pitcher plants. So when we talk about forest structure for bats, we're really talking about survival infrastructure. So the physical features that make roosting, reproduction, and thermoregulation possible. So the key question here is, where does that structure come from? So forest structure doesn't just appear randomly. It develops over time. And as forests grow, change, and respond to disturbance, that's where plant succession comes in. So forest management really is built around the idea of succession, which is the predictable way plant communities change over time. And most of the time, we're talking about secondary succession, which happens after disturbance like fire, a storm, or timber harvest. And the system isn't starting from nothing, so it's rebuilding or regenerating. Plants compete, they grow at different rates, they respond to changes in light conditions as the canopy opens and slowly closes again. So over time, the forest moves toward a more mature, stable condition. And honestly, almost all the forests that we manage are in the secondary succession. So the primary succession would be like starting completely from scratch. So it'd be like glacier retreats and lichens and moss breaking down rocks and starting over new soil. So we're at secondary succession. And looking at this photo here, we see these dotted lines. So they're indicating different stages of the succession. So we're going to go ahead and go through each of these stages. So our first stage is our early seral or early succession. It's basically nature hitting the reset button after like a disturbance. So once something opens up the canopy, plants don't waste any time moving in. Seeds pop up from the seed bank. Seeds are blown in, or some of them hitch a ride from mammals that walk through. And some plants are just regenerating from what was already there. Pretty quickly, you get grasses, sedges, and forbs carpeting the area. And it might look a little messy, but it's actually a super productive stage. Those plants fuel insects and pollinators, which then fuels everything else. And not long after, shrubs and young trees start establishing, and the whole system begins rebuilding itself. Oh, hello. If you're a manager and you want to maintain this early stage, you could use different tools to keep that stage going, just because it is such a powerhouse. But you want to consider what may happen as manager. So having that space open, it might be opportunistic for invasive species to move in. So there's a lot to consider when maintaining these stages. Thinking about wildlife that utilize this area, we have white-tailed deer, we have rabbits, we have American woodcocks, and a ton of pollinators. So moving on, as forest starts developing, we move into this mid-seral stage. Things start to feel a little bit more crowded. Shrubs and young trees really take over. The canopy keeps closing in, and less light makes it down to the forest floor. And you get these dense stands that are like pole-sized trees with a lot of stems, lots of cover. And for wildlife, this density is a good thing. So it offers protection from predators and weather, and all that developing structure, including dead trees and fallen logs, creates hiding spots and habitat for insects, amphibians, cavity nesting birds, and small mammals. So this is where you'll often find species like woodpeckers, flying squirrels, nuthatches, deer, and pine martens. So the stage has a ton of cover, growing the structural diversity. And then if the forest keeps maturing, you move into this late seral or old growth condition. And this is where things start to get really complex. So we start seeing big, large diameter trees. We have different multiple canopy layers, lots of snags, chunky, coarse, woody debris. So this late seral stage is really complex. A lot of species depend on it. So like northern spotted owls, certain frog species, martins, fishers, and certain woodpeckers. And these species really need a lot of large trees and layered structures to thrive. And so the big takeaway here is that forests aren't static. They're dynamic. They're shifting through stages over time. And because each stage looks and feels different structurally, different wildlife species plug into different parts of this gradient. Bats are a really great example of this. They don't all use forests in the same way. In fact, they're incredibly specialized in how they move through space. So let's go ahead and talk about our bat friends. We often group bats into foraging guilds based on how and where they fly and hunt. And those guilds line up really closely with forest structure and succession. On one hand, you have your open space foragers. These are the bats that are cruising high above the canopy or utilizing big openings, and they tend to be fast flyers with lower frequency calls, and they tend to do well in this early seral habitat, anywhere with canopy gaps and areas that have more disturbance, like what you see on the right side of this image, where the canopy is more open. And then you've got edge space foragers. So these species like transition, so forest edges, riparian strips, canopy breaks, places where insects tend to concentrate. And they really benefit from landscapes that have a mix of open and closed canopy. So that middle ground in the image, that's prime real estate for these guys. And finally, we have our clutter-adapted bats. These guys are built for dense forest interiors. So they fly slower, they're more maneuverable, they use high-frequency echolocation to weave through the vegetation. And they're typically associated with mid to late seral forests with closed canopy, lots of structural complexity, and more like what you see on the left side of this image. So when we think about the gradient from closed canopy to more open, with increasing disturbance, different bat guilds are going to respond differently. So that's why successional diversity matters. If we only manage for one structure, then we're really only supporting part of the bat community. All right, so how do we create these successional stages? Through disturbances. So disturbances could either be natural or human-driven. Natural disturbances include wildfire, often initiated by lightning strikes, as well as windstorms, flooding, insect outbreaks, or disease. These events can alter or kill vegetation, at any successional stage and may partially or completely reset plant communities. So, for example, a pine beetle outbreak can cause widespread mortality within a pine stand, creating substantial structural change. So, natural disturbance-based management is an ecological approach to forestry, which mimics natural disturbances. And when forest managers try to mimic natural disturbance, they're basically asking, what, what would nature have done here? And then they try to match that with the right management approach. So not all disturbances are the same. So some are going to be on the low severity end, with maybe just a few trees that die and fall. And the overall forest structure stays mostly intact. Others are more intense and can completely reshape the landscape. So think about something like a hurricane or a tornado. So that kind of event can blow down large sections of forest and create huge canopy openings. So you wouldn't really want to mimic something like that with, say, like a single tree selection treatment, which only removes a few trees and creates small gaps. If the natural disturbance is bigger, then you'd want to better reflect that with something more broad. So overall, the idea is to line up your silvicultural treatment with natural disturbance patterns of the region. So managing forests in a way that reflects the process that would have happened there historically. And I know it's a little silly to include a picture of Avatar Aang, but I can't help it. I always think about the four elements when we talk about disturbance. So fire, air, water, and earth. And these forces shape forest in a way that forest managers are also kind of doing the same thing, thinking about those elements. So I threw a new word at you, silviculture. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. So what it is the art and science of controlling the establishment, growth, composition, health, quality of forest and woodlands to meet the diverse needs and values of landowners and society on a sustainable basis. So there are decades, honestly, generations of research behind this field. It covers everything from tree establishment, to harvesting, to artificial and natural regeneration, growth dynamics, and competition and stand development. So just a ton of different things. But my favorite part of this definition is the idea of the art and science. I just love it when art and science can mingle together. So yes, it's a science-based field, but every forest stand is unique. Each one has its own history, shaped by past disturbances, soils, species, weather, and human decisions. So there's nuance, there's creativity, there's interpretation. So that's like the art part. And there's also a societal piece, so meeting diverse needs and values of landowners and society sustainably. So this isn't just about trees, it's about people, economics, wildlife, recreation, ecosystem services, and so much more. So I started the talk talking about forest management. Then I introduced silviculture. So how we're going to relate the two is that we're going to think about management as like the strategy and silviculture as the application. So management asks, what are our goals? While silviculture asks, okay, how are we actually going to do that? So every silvicultural system has three core parts, which you could see depicted in this graphic. So first we have regeneration. It's starting a new cohort of trees. Second, we have tending, so it's improving what's already there. And third, we have harvesting. So this method is used for the next age class. So over a lifetime in a stand, you're really thinking about these three components. So we already touched on regeneration when we talked about succession and young tree establishment. Tending is about enhancing growth quality and the composition of trees that are established, but before that final harvest. So you could think about methods like thinning to reduce competition, removing diseased trees, or even thinning out or clearing out the areas around seedlings, like your target seedlings. So you want to make sure that those seedlings have a chance. And then harvesting, that's the cutting method used to reset the stand structure and create a new age class. So now what we're going to do is we're going to walk through some of these major harvesting methods, and then we'll try to connect them back to bats. So specifically, we'll think about how each method might affect our three foraging guilds. So think about our open space foragers, our edge specialists, and our clutter adapted bats, because the way that we cut trees directly influences what kind of structure that we create and how bats are going to use that structure. Okay, so let's start off with one of the most well-known and sometimes most controversial system, which is clear cutting. So clear cutting is an even age regeneration system, which basically means you harvest most or all of the trees in a defined area at the same time. So you get big canopy openings, lots of light hitting the floor. And it's called even aged because after harvest, everything regenerates around the same time. So you end up with a new cohort of trees that are roughly the same age. When you suddenly let all that sunlight hit that floor, you're helping promote shade or shade intolerant species. So they start to grow faster. And then you start promoting the successional vegetation. So we'll start seeing our grasses and our forbs and our shrubs and young trees start developing. So ecologically, this practice is most similar to our high severity natural disturbance, so like those big windstorms or intense fires. And wildlife is going to respond differently. So when we're going to think about our bats here. So for bats, clear cuts often benefit open space foragers and edge specialists. They like those big openings and forest edges for hunting. But the clutter adapted interior bats, they may decline because that canopy cover is no longer there. So right away we see the trade-offs. They're little emojis. Next up, we have shelter woodcuts. So this is also an even-aged system, but instead of removing everything at once, trees are removed in a series of planned harvest. So some mature trees are intentionally left behind during this cut, and those retained trees, they'll provide a seed source. And they'll also provide partial shade for some of those plants. And that partial cover is also beneficial for other wildlife too. So you'll still increase light, but you won't completely open up the system. So ecologically, this mimics a moderate severity disturbance, like patchy wind or fire. And you keep the overstory structure, which means that you maintain habitat complexity. And so for our bats, this could be a little bit on the middle ground. So edge and gap associated foragers may benefit from increased like insect activity as the canopy opens. But at the same time, the retained trees still offer roosting opportunities and some structural continuity. But if canopy cover is reduced enough, dense interior specialists may still be sensitive. So again, it's about who benefits and who doesn't. Now let's shift gears to our uneven age system. So single tree selection is much more subtle. Instead of harvesting a whole stand, you remove individual trees periodically across the forest. Uh, that creates small canopy gaps scattered throughout the stand. And this represents a low severity disturbance. So it's similar to, like, say, a small wind throw event, localized insect damage, or individual tree mortality. And the overall canopy stays mostly intact, and you maintain multiple age classes at the same time. So for bats, this system tends to favor clutter-adapted species because the forest structure largely remains closed and complex. You still get small gaps that can boost insect abundance, but you don't dramatically change the interior structure. So open space species, though they might not benefit as much compared to clear cuts or shelterwood systems, there just isn't like large openings to exploit. So there are faces. And finally, we have group tree selection. So this is also an uneven aged system. But instead of removing single trees, you're removing small groups of trees together. So you don't get these, so you get patchy openings that are bigger than single tree gaps, but smaller than shelter wood or clear cut. So you're still allowing some of that light to hit the forest floor. And ecologically, this can mimic low to moderate severity disturbances like clustered wind throw or localized mortality. The key here is structural diversity. So you maintain that overall forest cover, but you introduce small patches of regeneration across the landscape. For bats, this could benefit edge and gap foraging species by increasing insect abundance and creating flight corridors. At the same time, because openings are relatively small and dispersed, clutter-adapted species may retain enough interior structure. So compared to large harvest or interior specialists will experience less disruption with the system compared to the others. So now that we walked, oh wait, let's do the faces. There we go. Okay, so now that we've walked through some of the major silvicultural systems and thought about how bats may respond based on their foraging guilds, and these are just predictions based on structure and behavior. The next question is, what does research actually show us? So let's dive into that. Okay, so on this slide, I'm summarizing a major review paper by Susan Loeb that synthesized results from 88 studies looking at how temperate insectivorous bats respond to different silvicultural treatments. As we talked about before, forest management changes food and cover. And those are two things that are central to bat habitat. And in this review, Loeb separated responses into foraging and roosting. And for right now, I'm going to focus just on foraging. Before we get into the graphs, I included a small illustration to remind us of 3 foraging guilds. So this graphic is adapted from another paper, just visually to show us these bats and how they differ in flight. So now, looking at the graph, so it's looking at the number of studies where bats' foraging responses were either negative, neutral, or positive across different treatments. And those treatments on the x-axis includes shelter wood cuts and clear cuts, fire, gap formation, history of plantation forestry, regrowth forest, and thinning. So our open space and edge bat species, they often show positive responses to treatments like clear cuts and shelter wood systems and fire. And our closed space bats or clutter adapted bats show a different pattern. So they're more likely to respond negatively to large clear cuts. However, they often respond more positively or at least neutrally to lower severity treatments like thinning or small gap formation. So let's go ahead and shift over to our roosting bats. So this is where we often see stronger or more consistent responses to forest management. Roosting habitat can be much more limiting than foraging habitat. So insects are relatively abundant and are mobile. But suitable root structure, like large diameter trees, snags, or trees with exfoliating bark, could take decades to develop. And once they're removed, they're not quickly replaced. So one interesting pattern that we see in this review is that the responses kind of differ a little bit from what we've seen from foraging. So our edge and open space bats, there are more negative responses associated with regrowth forest and areas with a history of plantation forestry. And then looking at our closed and narrow space bats, we see positive responses to fire. And thinking about roosting habitats, this all makes sense. So fires can create exfoliating bark. They could open up the canopy a bit, create snags, loosen bark, generate new root structures. But they show negative responses to the regrowth forest and thinning. So likely when those treatments reduce canopy, they're reducing complexity, they're removing suitable roost trees. So the broader takeaway here is that roosting responses tend to be more sensitive to structural features than foraging responses. A stand might be great for feeding, but it could lack appropriate roost structure. So it won't fully support bat populations. And importantly, bats often separate where they forage from where they roost. So that means that conservation and management needs to consider the landscape level structure. So maintaining those large trees and snags and structural diversity across stands rather than focusing on like a single treatment in isolation. Okay, so next, so we talked through different silvicultural systems and what the literature tells us about bat responses. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Instead of focusing on what we know, let's talk about how we know it. So we could start talking about study design, looking at these bats in managed forests. So first thing that you always want to consider is the management question. So we want to think about what treatments you're evaluating. So thinking about thinning, shelter wood cuts, clear cuts, fire, plantation history, or regrowth forest. And then you want to decide what outcome you care about. So are you interested in foraging habitat, roosting availability, stress or fitness, or any like community shifts? And just as importantly, like you need to think about your comparison. So are you comparing treated versus untreated stands? Are you using a before-after control impact, which is often stronger for management studies? And there you want to match your design to spatial scale. So at the stand scale, you might measure canopy structure or clutter or snag density. And at the landscape scale, you could ask different questions such as how bats are moving across habitat mosaics, or how they use edge or riparian strips or different openings. And this is where you could also include landscape covariates. So thinking about forest cover, fragmentation, distance to water or roads. Okay, so now that we thought about kind of questions, let's think about ways that we can measure all this. So one of the most common tools used is acoustic monitoring. So acoustic detectors allow us to measure bat activity across treatments. We could look at relative activity, occupancy, and responses to different foraging guilds. So we could look at our closed edge and open space bats. But it's important to interpret acoustic data carefully. So what we're usually measuring is foraging or commuting activity, not necessarily any like roosting behavior and not population size. But still using acoustics is incredibly powerful in this type of setting. And to go beyond activity and to understand who's actually present, researchers could use mist netting or harp trapping. So when you use capture methods, you could get demographic data. So you could get species ID, which might be really important too if you're working with endangered species or if you want to know if those endangereds are there. Sometimes with acoustic data, it's hard to parse out species. So having a bat physically in your hand, you're able to make that identification. And you could also, your sex, your age class, your reproductive condition, and body mass. And this is where you could also collect physiological data, get genetic sampling, and where you could attach transmitters for telemetry. So once bats are captured, telemetry allows us to understand how bats are actually using the landscape. So we use radio telemetry or GPS tags, depending on how large your species is. So they'll allow us to track bats. We could get home range size, commuting corridors. We could figure out what they're using, how they're using riparian areas or roads or hedgerows. We could also look at habitat selection. So we could look at what trees are being used or what areas are being used versus what's available. We could look at foraging patches and time budgets. Telemetry often reveals patterns that acoustics miss. So for example, a bat might forage in an opening, but roost in mature forest like kilometers away. So without telemetry, we wouldn't really be able to see that connection. And this method really emphasizes the importance of land scale thinking. You could also look at roost ecology, which is another critical component. So roosts are often found through telemetry. Let me go ahead and there's this video. Okay, I'm gonna play that, sorry. Okay, so roost are, once you like find your roost, you could do these emergence counts. That way you could get a little bit more an idea of the population size that's happening there. We could classify our roost types. So we could look at snags, cavities, bark crevices, the foliage that they're roosting in, just any structures that are relevant to those bats. And when we measure roost availability and quality, we could look at the snag density. We could get the diameter, the DBH of the tree. We could classify like how decayed that tree is. So are they using more live trees? Are they using more dead trees? Is there a preference of like that stage for the tree? And then we could also get like canopy cover. Are they using trees with a lot of canopy cover? Or are they using trees like this where there's no canopy cover? And then you could also measure that distance to water. We could get edge proximity. So the key analytical step in comparing roost here are what they're using versus what they're not using. So what's available and what are they using? That could tell us something about selection or avoidance. Because roost availability can be limiting, this part of the study design is often essential when evaluating forest management. Let's see. And finally, because, well, I work with mostly insectivorous bats, but you could throw in some prey studies here. So we could look at what prey is available. So you could use light traps, malaise traps, or pitfall traps across different treatments. You could use different metrics. So you look at insect biomass, the abundance, and the community composition that's there. So this will allow us to connect forest management, not just with bat activity, but prey availability. So For example, a thinning treatment might increase bat activity, but is it because of the flight space that's now available or the insect abundance or both? So including prey data could help us answer those mechanistic questions. Like I said, I mostly work with insectivorous bats, but I don't see why you can't apply this to looking at what fruits are available for your fruit-eating bats or any plant structure that's really important for those bats. Okay. Okay, so our conclusions. So forest management shapes wildlife habitat by altering forest structure, vegetation, and successional dynamics, which directly influences the availability of food and cover. Different silvicultural treatments create different habitat conditions, meaning some species benefit while others may decline depending on their ecological needs. Bat responses to forest management are strongly tied to foraging strategies. So with more open space bats often benefiting from canopy openings, while clutter-adapted bats rely more on complex closed forest structure. And maintaining structural and successional diversity across the landscape is key because no single forest condition supports all wildlife species. And well-designed research using tools like acoustics, capture methods, telemetry, and insect sampling could help managers understand how forest practices influence bats and wildlife. So with that, I want to thank you all for being here. And if you have any questions, I would love to hear them.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Katie. I think that was such a great overview of the field, the application, the methods that we use to try and answer hard questions about how forest management affects bats. So yeah, if there's any questions, if you want to put your question in the chat, I'll read it out for you. Otherwise, you can use the raise your hand feature to ask any questions and or any comments either about the presentation or things that you would like to have defined or explained again. A bunch of thank yous and great presentations in the chat for you, Katie.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate everyone coming.
What is the YouTube channel to find this when it's posted? Okay, so people want to know where to find it. So it's that you can look up GBATnet on YouTube. And if you came to us from our Facebook page, then I'll also be posting a link for the YouTube video up on our Facebook page and social media pages. Yeah, so it will be up there. You can just look up GBATnet on YouTube, and it should pull up right away. I don't think that there's another one of us. Um, okay, here's a good question. Do you have any insight about existing surveys in forests?
Hmm. Okay, so existing surveys in forest. Well, I guess, can you be a little bit more specific? Because
And that is coming from Nicole Nolan. So Nicole, like a little bit more specific, please. Exit
Hi.
surveys. Oh, here we go.
hi.
Sorry to ask about exit surveys within forested habitat because you showed a video of a really excellent tree that's easy to view
Mhm.
outside of the context of the other trees. But how about in more dense areas where you can't really get that really nice backlighting view?
Right. Yeah, that does make it more complicated, right? Um, yes, there are surveys that are conducted with all different types of bat species. Being able to find a good angle can be complicated and hard sometimes. And I find it best like going out with a couple of people to be able to, because you're not really sure where the bat's going to come out, right? So if you're able to have like another person and you could scout the tree a little bit. So the telemetry aspect of it really helps because you can narrow down to which tree it is. So if you were able to do that and maybe have another set of eyes, you might be able to see where that's coming out more easily. Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
for the most part, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to think if there's something like directly that I could send to you or provide, but yeah.
We did have another good question from Jamie. So in New Hampshire slash the East Coast, they have wind events and ice events. So what would be the most common to mimic? Uh, that's probably going to be pretty. I would like this is just my assumption. It'd probably be pretty specific for the like the region that you're in as to which one would be most appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely regional. I would think that if looking at different cuttings, like something maybe like group cuttings or shelter wood might mimic that a little bit more, but it definitely depends on the severity.
Hmm.
So you might want to like adapt it where you get a little bit across the board, different structures, using different systems to mimic that a little bit better.
All right. Do we have any more questions? Here we go from Lauren. How is climate change expected to change forest structure? This is something I know very little about. And is the answer, it depends.
Yeah, it depends. Definitely depending on where you are too. This is actually like something I haven't really looked too much into. Like it's not part of the systems that I've been working out of. Um, but yeah, you'll see depending on where you are too, like seeing more fire severity. So that's opening a lot more canopy than what may typically have happened there. So that could impact certain species a lot more than others. So our cluttered space bats might be far more impacted by like those wildfires than say our open space bats.
Okay. We've got a long comment here from Kim, tuning in from the Philippines. So here in our town, we have flying foxes, a couple different Pteropus species, in the urban centers, and we have been doing manual roost counts quarterly and found that most trees that they have been roosting in are non-native to the Philippines and more
Mm,
likely to be planted and cultivated historically.
yeah.
Even some feeding trees that we have seen recorded are also non-native. What are your thoughts on this? And do you think if non-native trees are removed or replaced, could this destabilize local bat populations? That's a great
Yeah.
and complicated question.
That is a great and complicated question, and kind of reminds me of the, you might have a dip, but could have some long-term benefits if native plants were, planted in place.
Hmm.
And it also reminds me, so that is very complicated. So I did a study in Madagascar, and the bats there, they're also a Tropus species, were using conifer forests that were planted there for paper. So that was all, I mean, there's so much fragmentation on their natural habitat. So it does get complicated. And it also brings up questions like, what are they, like, how far are they having to fly to look for those natural food sources?
Hmm.
So yeah, that's complicated. And I guess I'd want to ask you more questions about that, like how, if you all know how far they might be traveling for food, what
What's happened
other,
to their natural food resource, like their natural
yeah,
food
what's where
resources versus this introduced food resource? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and I guess what the surrounding area looks like. So if it's an urban habitat, yeah, I don't know what the surrounding area looks like, but that's it's interesting, like having to think about like the urban bats too.
Yep. And maybe how can we manage our forests to maybe promote bats foraging in their natural habitat versus
Right.
urban centers? Like there's lots of different questions that come from that one question.
So many questions. Yeah, the
Yeah.
buffering that could happen. Yep.
We've got one from Catherine, and this might be our last question. We have two more questions, but we might only be able to do one. If I missed any details about the assessment, which method is more effective for studying insectivorous bats? Pitfall traps or mist nets? Pitfall traps, I'm not sure if you actually mean pitfall traps or something else, but
Oh, harp traps, maybe?
maybe harp traps or mist nets? That's what I'm going to assume. So,
Yeah, so the pitfalls were for looking at insects. So if you wanted to like also include insect study, then maybe a pitfall for that. And then between mist nets and harp traps, it really depends on your system. When I was in Borneo, we used harp traps because of the corridors. They were a lot smaller than what we use in Missouri. So we'll use mist nets because we have a much more open space to cover. So it depends really on your system.
this is a good question. How long after selective silviculture strategies does it take for populations or to level in their response or to level or in their response? Like I guess after silvicultural practices, how long before the bat population stabilize? And if I
Hmm.
misinterpreted that question, please let me know, Casey.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I guess when you're asking that question, are you thinking about like everything starting from scratch? Because in a lot of these systems, you're doing it, you're not really impacting the overall forest. You don't have to like apply it for the entire forest. So you might be doing sections at a time. So you're still retaining that structure across the forest overall, but you're managing little pieces of it. So, I mean, I've heard from different people that like it could be pretty instant. And we're still trying to figure that out too. So it really depends on where you are. So using acoustics might be able to help you with that and catching bats. Yeah, so it really depends on, and then what application you're using. So I think you said like lower severity ones, you might not be able to notice a huge difference, but
All right. Okay, I think maybe we can fit in one last question. Okay. You spoke about doing insect studies. Do you ever take guano samples for diet assessment? Would that be beneficial?
yes.
That's a big
Yes, a big yes. I think it would be beneficial if you wanted to look at if you want to do a diet study and do like metabarcoding. Um, and you might also want to like catch some insects. So I mean, if you're doing the metabarcoding route, then you're looking at what they're eating, but it would also might be helpful to include an insect study to see what's also there. So we could see what they're selecting for, what's like available, what they're eating.
All right. And we did have someone ask about the YouTube channel one more time. And so I just to reiterate, and then we are going to wrap it up because we are at the top of the hour. Just for one last time, I will post if you visit us through our Facebook page, I will post a YouTube link for today's talk. Otherwise, you can just use the search bar to search GBATnet, and we should pull up right away. Otherwise, you can go to our Facebook page. I will be posting a link there. And otherwise, we can go ahead and thank Katie one last time for doing a great talk today. I think that was a great introduction into this field. And obviously, it sparked a lot more questions. And lots of the answers are it depends because forestry practices depend on where you are in the world, what your system is, what are your questions, what are we managing for? Because that will affect your practices. So I think that one of the reasons why you had so many great questions is because there's so many different applications for what we covered today. So thank you, Katie. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. And if you
Thank
want
you,
to
everyone.
revisit anything that we've talked about today, uh, visit our YouTube channel, and we will also post slides in PDF form on our website. So you can find us there. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.